Welcome to the Rabbit Hole. Hi, how are you? I'm Chris Valenti, and we're about to take a deep dive into history. Before we get started, make sure you like, subscribe, comment down below, hit the notification bell, and never forget to donate me $7,000. This is a new series where I'm going to attempt to prove to you that major historical events are directly tied to major political events that are happening today. And today's episode, we're going to be focused on the Middle East, right? The conflicts that are arising in the Middle East and have always been happening. And what I'm going to attempt to do is prove to you that the collapse of the Ottoman Empire is directly intertwined with Donald Trump's recent decision to acquire the entirety of the Gaza Strip. So, again, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's get started. So the first thing I want to do is just cover basic history about the Ottoman Empire. So I brought this up. This is a map of the Ottoman Empire, okay, and I believe this is towards the end of it. Yeah, you can see the gray areas, or sorry, the browner areas are around 1914, but the tanner areas are like the entirety of the Ottoman Empire back during the day. So the Ottoman Empire used to have a massive control over the area that we would now call the Middle East, right? And over the course of like 600 years, they started to lose their control a lot. And I want to read you just a little bit of this caption here. The Ottoman Empire. This greatest of the Muslim states in terms of duration was founded in the late 13th century by the Ottoman Turks. It lasted until its dissolution after World War I in 1918. Its early phase challenged the Byzantine Empire, Bulgaria, and Serbia. So we're not going to read the rest of this, but what's important about this is that the Ottoman Empire had a vice grip on this area. They had a lot of control over it, and I believe it was one of the only empires to not practice chattel slavery, which is kind of hilarious. I believe one of the emperors of the Ottoman Empire was a slave at some point. Regardless, the Ottomans were an incredibly impressive people, right? But what's important about this, and why I'm bringing this up, is because a lot of people don't know that the Ottomans fought in World War I. They fought alongside the Germans and against, the British and the French and us. Granted, I don't believe the United States ever had any conflict with the Ottoman Empire during World War I. It was almost entirely the British fighting at places like the Suez Canal. If you've played Battlefield 1, perhaps you know this. Regardless, guys, what I want to bring up is this. During World War I, okay, because remember, World War I didn't end until 1918. During World War I, in the middle of it, in 1916, there was a secret agreement that was carved up. It was a convention. It's called the Sykes Pico Agreement. And it was written up by these two men, a British man by the name of Sir Mark Sykes and a Frenchman by the name of Francois Georges Picot. Right? And we're going to read this, don't worry, but I want to give you the TLDR for a second. The Sykes-Picot Agreement was a very cocky agreement. The war wasn't over yet, but the French and the British truly believed that they would defeat the Ottoman Empire, which they did. And what they wanted to do was have an agreement on who would get what before the war ended, and there was total chaos scrambling over, who's going to take what territory, because, of course, when a war like World War I ends, at the time period that it was going to be extreme hyper-colonialism, just snagging up land grabs. So let's read a little bit of this. This is from Britannica. Sykes-Picot Agreement, May 1916. Secret convention made during World War I between Great Britain and France with the assent of Imperial Russia for the dismemberment of the Ottoman Empire. The agreement led to the division of Turkish-held, so Turkish-held is important, guys. After the Ottoman Empire collapsed, there was the establishment of Turkey. So modern-day Turkey is the remnants of the former Ottoman Empire, who also, Turkey has the second largest army in the entirety of NATO. You probably don't know that. And Turkey is where we keep our nuclear weapons, the ones that we have pointed at Russia. Anyway, the agreement led to the division of Turkish-held Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and Palestine into various French and British-administered areas. Do you see how it started to begin? How I'm starting to show you how the collapse of the Ottoman Empire started to lead to Trump's decision? Guys, this is the thing about history. Everything is connections. You are living through the consequences of decisions made by men who were 70 years old in 1918. Genuinely. And the decisions that our 70-year-old leaders are making now are going to affect our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. That's the thing about history. History is not a document. History is not the past. History is a living, breathing organism. History is you. History is the world you are living in. History is constantly being created, and you are a part of it, which is why you can't sit idly by when it's happening before your own eyes. You can't Just pretend like it's not happening, because the sword will be passed to you one day, and then your job will be to pass the sword to somebody else. And when they look out at the field and they say, you created this? What are you going to say? You're going to say, no, I didn't vote. Come on, guys. Anyway, back to the knowledge here. Negotiations were begun in November of 1915, and the final agreement took its name for the chief negotiators from Britain and France, Sir Mark Sykes and Francois-Georges Picot. Sergei Dmitriev Sazonov was also present to represent Russia, the third member of the Triple Entente. Let's go over just a small background of this. We're not going to do the entire thing. In the midst of World War I, the question arose of what would happen to the Ottoman territories if the war led to the disintegration of the sick man of Europe. That's what they used to refer to as the Ottoman Empire. They had agreed the Constantinople Agreement to give the Russians Constantinople, Istanbul, and areas around it. Now remember, guys, a major reason why the Brits and the French and the rest of the League of Nations, which was developed after World War I, the reason why they were so interested in the Ottoman Empire in the Middle East is because of that black gold underneath the sand, oil. And this is the oil era, you know. I mean, I think the steam engine was only invented something like 40 years prior, you know, and the establishment of all these new war machines, the tanks, the jeeps, the planes, the artillery, the trains, you fucking name it, it all needed oil. And where was all that oil? Underneath former Ottoman territory. So the French and the British, they're getting ready here. They're getting ready for the inevitable massive takeover of these oil reserves, right? Which we're seeing even today. Our cousins and our uncles fought and died in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they defended fucking burning oil pits, and now they're dying of lung cancer. You know what I'm saying? It's unbelievable. So another agreement that we see ending up happening, so in 1916 we have that, the Sykes Pico Agreement. Then what ends up happening is in 1917 we've got the Balfour Declaration. Right? Now, the Balfour Declaration is critical when it comes to the history of Israel and Palestine, right? So, the Balfour Declaration, 1917, is a statement of British support for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. Now, guys, semantics is important here. Verbiage is important. Let's read this again. The Balfour Declaration, a statement of British support for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. Now, what does that mean? That means that according to the maps of the time and according to all of the experts and the historians and everybody who was studying this type of shit in the Middle East, Palestine existed. Palestine had existed for an incredibly long time. I believe it was called like Philistine beforehand or some shit like that. I don't know too much about biblical history, but this deal was made, the Balfour Declaration, for the Jewish people to establish a home within the area of Palestine, meaning that Palestine wasn't going to be disintegrated, or the Palestinians weren't going to be relocated, potentially, but a home for the Jewish people would be created within it. Now, this Balfour Declaration was made in a letter dated November 2nd, 1917, from Arthur James Balfour, the British Foreign Secretary. Now, this letter was sent to Lionel Walter Rothschild, the second Baron Rothschild of Tring, a leader of the Anglo-Jewish community. Now, you probably heard the name Rothschild, but who is Lionel Walter Rothschild? He was a very, very wealthy Jewish man living in England who was a part of this community that used their immense amount of wealth. And it wasn't just Jewish people in this community. There were Jews, there were Christians. It was just wealthy people. There were atheists. This community of the Anglo-Jewish community would raise tremendous amounts of wealth and then donate that wealth to Parliament, sort of like modern lobbyists, right? And they did that in order to get different sorts of legislation passed that would support their profit margins, right? Leader of the Anglo-Jewish community, though the precise meaning of the correspondence has been disputed, its statements were generally contradictory to both the Sykes-Picot Agreement, a secret convention between Britain and France, and the Hussein-McMahon Correspondence, an exchange of letters between the British High Commissioner in Egypt, Sir Henry McMahon, and Hussein ibn Ali, the Emir of Mecca, which in turn contradicted one another. So that's another thing that we're going to talk about in a second, is that secret agreements were made with the Sharif of Mecca, or the Emir of Mecca. And it was to get these people, a lot of the Muslims, to rise up against the Ottoman Empire. And the secret agreement with them was that they would create an Arab home within the area of Palestine that would be 100% Arab controlled. And I'm going to pull this up real quick Here is it, the Hussein McMahon correspondence, because I actually totally forgot to even bring this up. So again, now we're back to 1915 and 16. Remember the secret agreement, the Sykes Pico agreement is in 1916, and they're talking about carving up these different areas and giving them to the British and the French and the Russians, and none of it included the Arabs or the Jews. That is now, the Jews come in with the Balfour Declaration, and now we have the Hussein McMahon correspondence. Series of letters exchanged in 1915 to 16 during World War I between Hussein ibn Ali, the Emir of Mecca, I think it's also referred to as the Sharif of Mecca, and Henry McMahon. In general terms, the correspondence effectively traded British support of an independent Arab state for Arab assistance in opposing the Ottoman Empire. So again, what did I just say earlier? What is that? That means that the British are making a secret deal with the Emir of Mecca, who's like their highest religious leader, saying, we will help you establish an Arab-only state as long as you rise up and help dismantle the Ottoman Empire, which they did, right? But here's the thing. Meanwhile, they have another secret agreement that we talked about, the Sykes Pico, which is, wait a minute, you're not carving out an Arab state, you're carving out French, British, and Russian states. And then we've got the Balfour Declaration that says, wait a minute, you're carving out secret agreements to create a Jewish home in these areas. There are too many secret agreements that are contradictory to one another. Right? And like it says here, it was later contradicted by the incompatible terms of the Sykes Pico agreement. Luigi, stop it. Luigi hears people in the hallway, says, you might bark. Baby girl, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. Mama, 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 mama. No need to bark. So I have to keep on talking, because if it gets silent, she's going to hear the person in the hallway. So I'm going to have to keep on talking for a little bit and just keep it going. No, it's okay, mama. So let's just keep on talking, and I'll just read this in terms of talking. Series of it was later contradicted by the incompatible terms of the Sykes Pico agreement, secretly concluded between Britain and France in May 1916, and Britain's Balfour Declaration of 1917. So back to the Balfour Declaration. Balfour Declaration issued the continued efforts of Chaim Weizmann and Nahum Zakalo, Zionist leaders in London, fell short of the expectations of the Zionists, who had asked for the reconstruction of Palestine as the Jewish national home. See why I said semantics matters? The Balfour Declaration, as we said here, it has it in quotes here, the establishment in Palestine of a national home. That's like saying the establishment in the United States of a national home for the Jewish people. That's not saying you get the entirety of the United States. That's saying within the United States you can make a Jewish home, right? So down here you see that the Zionists who were part of the movement, they were upset because they were asking for the complete and total reconstruction of Palestine to become the Jewish national home, right? And this is all based off of, you know, the Torah and the Old Testament and biblical claims, which really don't mean anything in today's modern world. Luigi, you are not getting up, and you are not... Sorry about that, guys. Luigi went fucking crazy because there was somebody in the hallway, but we're back now. Where we just were was we were talking about the League of Nations, right? Or we were talking about biblical claim over lands, right? So after 1918, World War I ends, the Ottoman Empire is dissolved, and the establishment of Turkey begins, right? That's when we get the League of Nations, which is like the... not the predecessor, it's the ancestor of the United Nations, right? And the League of Nations is exactly what you think it is. It's a league of all these different nations who won World War I, who are going to work together in order to like fight for democracy, but they're actually really just going to colonize the rest of the fucking planet until World War II comes around, and then they really have to like bite their thumb. But regardless, we have a whole bunch of mandates. Now, I know you've heard the word mandate before, but the mandates by the League of Nations, it's not like a mandate, like a rule. A mandate was like ownership of land. So let's talk about this. A mandate, an authorization granted by the League of Nations to a member nation to govern a former German or Turkish colony, Turkish meaning the Ottoman Empire. The territory was called a mandated territory or a mandate. Now, what did that mean? What that meant was that... Oh, why is it lagging again? Oh, it was lagging for a second. So what does it mean to have a mandate, right? What that essentially means is that you're not smart enough to be independent yet. But one day you'll be smart enough. Once you learn from us white men, us Europeans, once us British and French and American, and Russians, once we teach you how to behave, then you can be independent. That's essentially what a mandate meant. So let's look at some of the mandates, right? Here we have the British mandate for Palestine. Zoom in here. Following the defeat of the Ottoman Empire in World War I, the Allied powers established the British Mandate of Palestine over the southern Levant region. Now, the Levant is called the area of the Levant because of the three Levantine religions: Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. Those are all religions that come from the area of the Levant. You've also heard of Abrahamic, same thing. In 1923, Great Britain allowed the Hashemite dynasty to administer the portion of the mandate east of the Jordan River, right? So where's Jordan up here? I think that's actually further up, unless I'm out of my fucking mind. Is this Jordan? Yeah, this is Jordan. East of the Jordan River. Where are we? Called Transjordan, and granted it full independence in 1946. The land west of the Jordan River remained under direct mandatory administration until 1948, when the British Mandate of Palestine was removed. So British administration until 1948. Pretty much all of Palestine here, right? A lot of this is like, we got the Gaza Strip somewhere over here, but this is all under British control, right? And then over here we've got the Transjordan Emirate, who are sort of like Arab control, so it's not the same promise as the Hussein Agreement, but it's still relative Arab control, right? Let's get out of that. Oh, what did I do? I went the wrong way. There we go. The mandates. So, let's read this. Following the defeat of Germany and Ottoman Turkey in World War I, their Asian and African possessions, which were judged not yet ready to govern themselves. Remember what I was saying earlier? See, all of these areas were judged not yet ready to govern themselves. They were distributed among the victorious Allied powers under the authority of Article 22 of the Covenant of the League of Nations. It was a compromise between the Allies to retain the former German and Turkish colonies in their pre-armistice declaration. That annexation of territory was not their aim in the war. The mandates were divided into three groups on the basis of their location. Okay, so this is important. The mandates were classified into different classes. A Class A mandate consisted of the former Turkish provinces of Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Palestine. So now you're starting to see the creation of the world that you live in today. Before this was just simply the Ottoman Empire. This was Ottoman-controlled area. These territories were considered sufficiently advanced that their provisional independence was recognized, though they were, though they were still subject to Allied administrative control until they were fully able to stand alone. Iraq and Palestine, including modern Jordan and Israel, were assigned to Great Britain, while Turkish-ruled Syria and Lebanon went to France. All Class A mandates reached full independence by 1949. So what you see is from 1920 to 1949, the British, the French, the Russians, they have all carved up the Middle East. And this is why you see flat borders in the Middle East, versus in Europe where it's all natural borders that are around rivers and mountains, right? These borders are arbitrary. They were drawn up by fucking white colonialists like Sir Sykes and Francois Pico and John Balfour and Lionel Rothschild. These are the men who created the conflicts that you are seeing the reach of into even the modern era. So that's Class A mandates. Class B mandates consisted of the former German-ruled African colonies of Tanganyika, parts of Togoland and the Cameroons, and Rwanda-Urundi. The Allied powers were directly responsible for the administration. So this isn't even just the Middle East, guys. This could also be its own video. This also all applied to Africa, okay? A lot of the African portions of Africa were controlled by the Ottoman Empire, right? So a lot of these areas were split up between the Allies as well. And this is why you see, like, it's not a coincidence that there's so much conflict in modern parts of Africa and modern parts of the Middle East. This is all because of an extremely abusive form of colonialism, right, which was the League of Nations mandates. So the Class B mandates are in areas of Africa, right? Most of the Cameroons and Togoland were assigned to France, and Rwanda-Urundi, now Rwanda and Burundi, went to Belgium. Now a Class C mandate consisted of various former German-held territories, integral parts of Southwest Africa, New Guinea, that went to Australia, Western Samoa, which is now Samoa, assigned to New Zealand, the islands north of the equator, to the Western Pacific. See, this is where you start to see some of the Western Pacific islands going to Japan, right? Leading into World War II. Theoretically, exercising the mandates was supervised by the League's Permanent Mandates Commission, but the commission had no real way to enforce its will in any of the mandatory powers. The mandate system was replaced by the UN trusteeship system. See what I mean, guys? Is that this League of Nations then turned into the United Nations, right? So, how am I gonna tie this up at the end? It's lagging again. All right, now it's not lagging. How am I gonna tie this up at the end? Well, I'm gonna tie it up like this. This goes all the way until 1949 with these mandates, right? And the creation of Israel in 1948, right? And after 1948, I'm not going to be bringing up documents for the rest of this. We see the Cold War, right? The Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, where a lot of strife and fighting over the oil in the Middle East to power all of these nuclear reactors and to power all of the weapons of war that we're creating and the military-industrial complex. We see the Soviet-Afghan war. We see American influence, with the Iran-Contra deal. The Cold War, you see the Middle East go through a extremely large amount of Western interference. Excuse me. And what we see after the destruction of the Soviet Union in 1991 is American involvement escalates, okay? And we start to create a blood bond with Israel where we are funding everything about their nation so that we can have a tight relationship with like the largest American base in the Middle East, which is Israel. It's just essentially, you go to Israel, it's going to be just like the United States, except a lot of people are speaking Hebrew, right? It's very similar. And the way that I want to tie this together is that we saw all of the horrible shit that went down between the Israelis and the Palestinians during the Nakba, right, in the 1990s, which is a genocide, right? And then as we moved into the early 2000s and the 2000 teens, we saw a lot of Israeli interference, like bombing places like Beirut and bombing the Gaza Strip and controlling the water and the electricity. And then, of course, October 7th happened, and we saw the insane genocide that the Israelis committed upon, or the Israeli government led by Netanyahu committed on the people of Palestine and Gaza. In response to a heinous terrorist attack, they commit a genocide, right? And now that this conflict has started to slow down, and we've seen all of the shit that is going down, the last and final thing that I lead us to in this deep dive down the rabbit hole is this. Trump says Israel will hand over Gaza to the U.S. after fighting ends. U.S. President Donald Trump has restated a vision in which the U.S. would take over Gaza after officials in his administration had appeared to contradict his earlier commitments. The Gaza Strip would be turned over to the United States by Israel at the conclusion of fighting, Trump said on Thursday. He reiterated that the idea would mean resettling Palestinians and that no U.S. soldiers will be needed. This is absolute bullshit because you cannot resettle people without soldiers because people will resist. Resettling is a form of ethnic cleansing, and ethnic cleansing is a form of genocide. So, what did we learn? We learned that the collapse of the Ottoman Empire and the Ottoman control over the area now known as the Middle East, the collapse of that Ottoman Empire led to a power grab between greedy colonial Europeans. And that land grab, that power grab, led to a rising conflict between the multiple different cultures living in the Middle East, who were now split up, and Africa, who were now split up into three different classes, Class A, B, and C, all controlled by colonial leadership. What we then see is that after that colonial leadership ends and these nations are declared independent, right? Western imperialism lands back in the Middle East to fight the Cold War, harvesting oil, harvesting opium, harvesting everything. The Soviets go to war in Afghanistan. The CIA goes to Iran. We have Western imperialism. And what do we get after that? That leads to the U.S. War in Iraq, 22-year long, the invasion of Afghanistan, and the funding of the Israeli war machine while they committed genocide on the Palestinians. And how does that end? That ends with Donald J. Trump proposing the United States has a full and complete takeover of the Gaza Strip. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the rabbit hole of history. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and donate to me $7,000. This was a joy, and we're going to do a deep dive into the rabbit hole every Saturday. Okay, it's 7 o'clock. So thank you very much. I'll catch you on the next one.